it's not enough to put yourself into somebody else's shoes. And the easiest way that I explain that when I work with people is you have to kick your own off first. So if you take yourself into another person's situation or circumstances and you look at that situation from your perspective, that's where the whole thing is fundamentally skewed. You have to look at it from their perspective.
Hi, my name is Anita Nowak, and I'm the author of this book. Welcome to Season 12 of Purposeful Empathy, a show that is dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand that the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the show. Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today, I am joined by Neil Lewis, who is the founder of the Empathy Coach, an organization that specializes in empathic, relationship-based leadership, coaching, and communication. For over 25 years, Neil has specialized in personal development. And in the last decade, he's explored the key principles, behaviors, and mindset that is required to face even the toughest challenges with resilience. And what he's found is that it all comes down to one key skill, no surprise, empathy. He believes that everyone wants to be happy, peaceful, and energized. Empathy and empathic practices are the key to unlocking everyone's potential to that happiness, he says. Quote, I am on a mission to prove the relevance of empathy to every aspect of the human experience. Welcome to the show, Neil.
Thank you. It's really cringy hearing you read that back because I know I wrote that and sent it over to you, and it's like, oh, did I really say that? But yeah, it's true. It's true.
Well, you found a kindred spirit because I think we're both empathy enthusiasts and empathy evangelists, right?
Absolutely,
So
100%.
I know that we have a few questions to cover, but I always like asking about the backstory. So I would like to know what called you into the empathy space, if there's any kind of twists and turns or pivots that are part of the story.
Yes. So I think I guess there are a couple of key sort of milestones, if you like, that have kind of got me to where I am. And I always think it's interesting thinking about somebody's journey and where your journey takes you. And sometimes you can experience real hardships and trauma, and at the time you just don't know why that's happening to you. And it's only when you look back that you can see that it's all part of the journey. And I think there's like a lot of people, I think my journey's very much been trauma informed. So some of the challenges that I faced in my early years, some of the challenges that I faced in my teenage years, being diagnosed with depression and anxiety in my early 20s, and all of those things prompting or nudging you on a journey of self-discovery, and kind of coupling that with a corporate career that I kind of fell into, which was very much around learning and personal development. But again, I look back now and think it's no coincidence that I fell into that. It was absolutely part of my journey, and the directions that took me in terms of learning more about human behavior and sort of the psychology of learning, personality type theory, and all those things that I picked up. And there's no kind of one thing. It's just a real sort of culmination of all these little steps. And I guess one of the biggest things that happened to me was in sort of in 2014. I was 34 at the time, had a good job, decent salary, married, home, all all pillars stable and secure. And then within a few days, I lost my job, and my younger brother passed away very suddenly and unexpectedly. He was 24 at the time. He was 10 years younger than me. And it was when two of your sort of foundational pillars when one is rocked, it's bad enough. When two are rocked at the same time or completely torn out from under you at the same time, it forces you into that space of real self-reflection and questioning a lot of things that you thought about your life, and a lot of things that you just took for granted and believed were completely true. And I guess that's what trauma does. Trauma, it just shakes all of our foundations. It rips out from under us everything we thought we knew, everything we thought we believed. So it was a bit of a back to basics for me at that particular time, and I had to find coping strategies that I'd never found before. and I found counseling, psychotherapy, and mindfulness and yoga as four sort of different. I get it was things that I'd probably been previously quite scathing of, and trauma forced me into a space of, do you know what? I am so well equipped to deal with this. I'm willing to try anything. So sort of that mind just having to be open and trying new things and finding just the most incredible communities, support. And what's really interesting about all the things that I found in 2014 is that a real cornerstone of all those things is, of course, empathy. And I thought I knew what empathy was, Anita. I learned about empathy in 1998 when I first went on a customer service training program for my first job. I got told about stepping into the customer's shoes, and I thought, that's great, I've got that licked. And then a couple of years later I started training people that very same slogan, yeah, step into the customer's shoes. And it wasn't until I started sort of moving more into those spaces of really understanding personal development, personal reflection, counseling and psychotherapy, that I understood that there's a lot more to it than that. And one, okay, I'd probably been getting it wrong for about 15 years. thought I understood it, didn't. But actually that realization of what it actually is and how powerful it can be, but also how it's a conscious choice, it's a deliberate choice that we make, really made me realize the power of it. And yeah, and from then on, again, quite a serendipitous journey. I ended up working with two psychotherapists, going into business with two psychotherapists, and we created a psychotherapeutic training organization, which was all around giving some of the more accessible counseling and psychotherapeutic techniques to anyone, to corporate people, to frontline public service practitioners. I love the chapter in your book about the healthcare workers and the real warriors out there that are making such a difference. I spent 5 years working. I'd spent 15 years working in the private sector. I then spent 5 years working with the public sector, and wow, what a mindset shift that was for me to go from working with CEOs and leaders to working with paramedics and social workers and police officers and sex offender managers. Just a real totally different pace, but actually on the back of my own traumas. And I laugh about it now. After losing my brother and after being made redundant, I really was struggling to care about things like display screen equipment assessments and all the HRE corporate training stuff that I'd done before. My life had changed, my outlook on life had changed. And, I needed to align myself to something that meant something to me, and actually moving away for that and stepping into working with people all the time that are just doing such incredible work. And I can't speak for, what happens in the States, but I know here in the UK, those frontline public service workers, they're not particularly well paid. They don't get a massive amount of investment because they're so busy and it's public money. So it was such a privilege to spend that time working with those people and supporting those people, and just maybe having the tiniest bit of difference in how they face into their day and they support the people that they need to support. It was just such a privilege. So, and then sort of 5 years of working in that space, there were some changes in our business. I stepped away very amicably, still work very closely with that business. And then the pandemic hit. And I was on a contract at the time, and I lost that contract, everything just down tools. And there was that moment of, oh, what am I going to do now? And then I just thought, well, what are you going to do now? For the first time ever in your life, you can choose. So, and I'm going to get to the end. It's a very long story in 2 seconds. I did the Ikigai, which is in your book. I sat down, I did the Ikigai. I kind of mapped out all the things that I could do, all the things that I could learn, and then correlated it with all the things that I actually really loved about everything that I'd learned over the years, and that which the world needs. And I was left with one word in the middle. It was empathy. And that's where the empathy coach was born.
Incredible. So what do you actually do? So what's the work? So give me some examples of some of the clients you work with.
Okay, so there's 3 arms to my business. The first arm is the learning arm. So this is where I will work with individuals and teams to open their minds and expand their perception of empathy in much the same way that I had my mind opened. It's not as simple as stepping into somebody else's shoes. There's a lot more to it than that. What gets in the way? When is that easy? When is that hard? You know, how do we use empathy with purpose and deliberately? So that's the sort of learning side of things. And I work with corporate teams. I work with individuals. I still work with private sector teams as well, really teaching them how to not just think empathically, but demonstrate empathy as well. Because it's all very well thinking empathically. How would anybody know that you're being empathic? You have to demonstrate it too. So, sort of really helping people to understand how to think empathically and how to demonstrate empathy. That's the learning side. The coaching side is working more one-on-one with individuals to understand their own unique barriers to empathy, their own unique blocks where they perhaps struggle with individuals. But I also do relationship coaching. So I'll work with couples or with leaders and direct reports or with peers or friends, parents and children to help them understand each other more. And understand that actually what we'll have here is we'll have different approaches, nothing right or wrong, just different. And if we could understand each other's approach and each other's intention, then actually we will come at each other from a very different space. I use empathy very much in workplace mediation as well. That's I mean, it's I guess it's kind of in the coaching realm. So that's the coaching arm. And then there's the consultancy arm, which is where I will work with organizations to understand, what are your customers saying about you? What are your employees saying about, you know, what do employee engagement surveys tell us? What do line manager indexes tell us about the emotional intelligence, if you like, of your organization? Okay, and then what do we need to do? What are the goals? What are the hurdles that we need to cross to address some of these challenges that you're having with customers or with staff, to make your organization a more empathic place, a more compassionate place, and a more emotionally intelligent place.
Beautiful. So, what do you think, over the work that you've done, is the biggest myth that people have about empathy?
I think the biggest myth is that we all just do it. So many times when I've kind of gone into those situations working with individuals, or whether it's training, and I mention the word empathy, everyone thinks that they do it. I thought that I did it for years, Anita. So I'm not about shaming people in any way. For me, it's about enlightening people in the same way that I was enlightened, that actually I thought I understood it, but you know what, I didn't. It's not enough to put yourself into somebody else's shoes. And the easiest way that I explain that when I work with people is you have to kick your own off first. So if you take yourself into another person's situation or circumstances, and you look at that situation from your perspective, that's where the whole thing is fundamentally skewed. You have to look at it from their perspective. And to do that, we have to seek to understand. We have to ask so many questions, and from a curious space, not from a space of agenda, where actually I'm just asking you questions here so I can try and change your mind or convince you to think differently or face into this situation differently. I need to understand how you see this situation, how you're experiencing this situation, not how I would if I was in it, or how I did when I was in it, if it's a shared experience. It's not about me, it's about the other person. And I think that to me, it seems to be the one that I have to go through time and time again, is that actually it's not about stepping into somebody else's shoes. It's about kicking your own shoe, understanding yourself. There's a huge amount of self-awareness required. Understanding your own values, your own views, your own beliefs, so that you can put them to one side and choose whether they're actually helpful in this situation or not. And all I need to do is understand what's going on for you right now. How are you experiencing the situation emotionally? What's going on for you? That's when I can respond in the right way. If I don't understand what's happening for you, I'm like, well, I might get it right and I'd be lucky, but more often than not, I'll get it wrong. And the trouble is, if we inadvertently are unempathic with somebody, or are invalidating to somebody, and we will do this, we will be unempathic and we will invalidate people all the time, completely unintentionally. But when we do that, we've lost the connection.
Mm.
It's going to be
What does
really
that
hard
look
for us
like?
to.
For example, I can think of examples, but
Hmm,
in your perspective, what does it look like when we unintentionally unvalidate somebody,
okay.
unintentionally react in an unempathic way?
Again, the simplest example that I often use is let's say, for example, you have a friend who January time, they've had a nice Christmas, they probably ate a few too many mince pies and a bit too much turkey, and they'll say something to you along the lines of, "Oh, I just feel so fat right now."
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm a good friend, I will say to that person, "Don't be ridiculous. You look great. You look fine. I think you look fantastic. I think what are you talking about?" Now, the intention there is to make that person feel better.
Mm-hmm.
What I have just done is completely invalidated their experience
Mm-hmm.
and demonstrated that I don't understand
Mm-hmm.
their perspective, that I actually challenge their perspective, that I think that they're talking. So now it's almost like now not only does that person feel fat, they also feel stupid. it's just, and that's a really, really simple basic example, but we will do it all the time. Every time we tell someone not to worry about something, every time we tell someone to calm down,
Mm-hmm.
all of those things we will do
Mm-hmm.
with the best of intentions, but actually all they do is invalidate the other person's
So what
experience.
would be useful in that circumstance to how to respond in a way that would validate and would be seen as more empathic?
So for me, it's about reflecting back what
Mm.
you're hearing, reflecting, and again, this is why it's all these things. Which, as I'm reading your book and it's coming, I'm thinking, yes, 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 it's absolutely right. You know, we reflect back our understanding of that person's experience, and we reflect it back accurately.
Mm.
What that does, so for example, that friend of mine that says I feel so overweight right now, you know,
Mm.
I can offer back something along the lines of, "I'm really sorry to hear that you feel that way. I'm gutted that you feel that way." Or, "It's horrible when you don't feel good about yourself."
Mm.
That might be my response.
Mm.
That's the empathy. That's the subconscious message I've sent there is, I get it. I hear you. I understand you. We're connected now. Now I can potentially work with you. Now I have a chance at challenging you in the right way, you know, offering you a Socratic question, for example, around, you know, is this the way you always feel, or how often do you feel this way, or what's contributed to this? Let's explore it. And I can do that because we're connected. But the minute I invalidate somebody, we're disconnected. So anything I offer is likely going to fall on deaf ears because the barrier's gone up. You don't get it. And nobody does it intentionally. Well, I don't believe anyone does it intentionally. But
Mm.
when we validate somebody, when we demonstrate our understanding of their situation, and I know these are really sort of straightforward examples, but I tend to find that they're the ones that are the most easy to relate to. When we validate somebody and we communicate our understanding of their reality, we are connected with them then. But actually, and again, similar to something that you write about in your book, we're slowly chipping away at any gaps in that person's self-concept or self-esteem. That's the long-term power that empathy has. In the short term, it can connect us, it can diffuse tension, it can demonstrate our understanding, it can put us on the good foot to actually explore something and maybe solve some problems. In the long term, repeated empathy, repeated demonstrations and understandings and acceptance of an individual chips away at anything that's sort of killing their self-esteem or their sense of self, it's a tiny little message that says you're okay.
Mm.
It's okay for you to feel the way you do. And that's where it was a real privilege to work with the frontline public service teams, because they're dealing with people whose self-esteem, self-concept is completely wiped out all the time.
Mm.
And you inadvertently invalidate one of those people or are unempathic to those, actually all it does is reinforce that behavior, that I'm not good enough, or I'm a bad person, or I'm a waste of space, whatever that person's self-esteem would be. And we have an opportunity to have the opposite effect on somebody's self-esteem.
Mm. Now,
Yeah,
this sounds
simply by
trauma
empathizing.
informed because I imagine, so I'm just going to throw on my skeptic's hat for a second. This is not
Okay.
the lane that I swim in, but let's just
Yeah,
say, for
yeah.
argument's sake,
Mhm.
somebody's saying, oh my gosh, all this validation, all this like touchy feely stuff. Like, we need to hold people accountable. We're a high performance culture. Get on with it.
Mhm.
Uh, what do you have to say about that?
So you can do both. And actually, you're far more likely to be able to hold someone accountable and someone to be committed to their accountability if they feel understood. Because I often think those cultures, whether it be in a family or in an organization, that feel very compliance cultures, you will only ever get the bare minimum from. You will only ever get what is, you will only ever meet expectations in a compliance culture. And what you also might find is that people in a compliance culture will work very hard to prove you wrong.
Mm.
They'll be resistant and they'll challenge. Now, where you have a culture of commitment in a relationship, a family, an organization, actually what you get here is people that will work really hard to prove things right. You will get people that will go above and beyond, that will work really hard to go on the journey with you and to support you and to realize your vision, whatever that might be. And in my experience, empathy as a practice and as a tool and as a technique and as a fundamental cornerstone of any relationship is what ensures that culture of commitment and that and brings people on that journey. If I think about some of the corporate organizations that I've worked with over the years, where teams feel misunderstood or feel that their senior leadership populations are out of touch in their ivory tower and don't get what it's like down here for us, actually, these are compliant workforces. Where a workforce feels represented by the senior leadership population and understood by the senior leadership population, and changes or transformation in those cultures is communicated in a way that is meaningful for the workforce, that is a demonstration of empathy. Comms and engagement teams hate me, Anita, because I'm the person that says you can't just have one story. You need to have several versions of the same story, one that will satisfy your shareholders, one that will satisfy your senior leadership, one that will satisfy your workforce. And it's the same story, but it's told in a different way. And I always say my sort of key with that is make the audience the star of your story. So actually, if you've got a message to communicate to a particular workforce, they're the star of the story, not the shareholders, not the leaders.
Hey there, I don't mean to interrupt a fabulous conversation. I just want to draw your attention to the fact that there are so many other great conversations on my YouTube channel. Over 120 episodes with already 25,000 views, completely organic. Thanks to you, my listeners, viewers, watchers. Please subscribe. The world needs more empathy, and you have a role to play. Okay, so in a post-COVID world, let me ask you about a very specific situation. I'm when I was giving talks as we were coming out of the pandemic and there was this move back to work, I was asked, what can we do to help expedite the feeling of us, feeling reconnected again? And my answer was, well, go for a beer, like plan a gathering that has nothing to do with work and just let people reconnect as human beings before having work meetings. So that was at the beginning. And now I'm often asked, well, if the leadership want to bring people back into the workplace, and the workforce is really excited about the idea of more work at home and less at work. And it seems to be a bit of a tension. And I understand both sides of the argument, because I actually think it's not so much about oversight and sort of micromanagement. That part I don't agree with. But the idea of people coming together in physical spaces actually helps reconnect people. And there's a lot of, pro-social outcomes that derive from that. But at the same time, I also respect that employees do like to have agency over how they spend their time. And so I'm just curious to know what you think about that particular conversation.
Well, it's an interesting one, and I noticed this quite early on in during the pandemic, and a great example being, because I do a lot of work with personality type theory, and I've been a student of the Myers-Briggs type indicator for a long time. Love it or hate it, everyone has their own opinion of it. I love it. I always have. I've found it far more beneficial than not in all the years that I've used it. But I talked quite a lot in the early days of the pandemic about introversion and extroversion. And it was really interesting to see the dynamics change for people. So actually, in my experience in the conversations that I have, actually quite a lot of people with an introversion preference liked the going to home working and going to having space. And it's really interesting. My husband and I'm an extrovert, he's an introvert. And it was really interesting to see the dynamics change in our relationship, because I went from being out and about, training different people, speaking at events, and just being constantly surrounded by that hustle and bustle of energy, which really energizes me, to working solely in this little room. And he went from being in a really busy, hustly, bustly office, all open plan, and people sort of pulling on him from he's quite a senior leader, so he'll have a lot of people asking things of him, to going to his little office, which is just at the end of and the other end of the hallway from mine. And the shift in dynamics, where at 5 o'clock he would bounce out of his office energized, feeling great, had a great day, because he'd been able to engage when he needed to, and then not, and just have that time in between that was just his. I would be dragging myself out that door because his energy levels had just gone up and mine had just come down. So yeah, and it was really interesting. So, and I'd gone from, see, he would get home from work pre-COVID, exhausted, drained, wiped out, because he'd spent all day de-energizing. So I think it's that, to me, is another consideration for us when we think about how we perhaps move into a new world now with more hybrid working, I think. And I guess in my head as well, one of the things that I'm always asking this question, and I'm sure that you will understand that as you were telling me that story, people are saying we want to bring more people back to work. My question is why? Why? Why do we want to do that? And why are some people all for it, and why are some people resistant to it? And we've got to understand all of that, so that, one, we can create a solution that is a little bit harmonious. We're ticking everyone's boxes. And again, just at very simplistic terms, think about introversion, extroversion. How does hybrid working tick both of those boxes? And secondly, when we communicate that shift, when we tell people, or when we ask people, because we really should be asking people to come on this journey with us rather than mandating that journey, true collaborative working. When we ask people to do that, we validate in that ask. We acknowledge that actually this is going, that we're going to keep some of the good stuff. We know that actually some of you might lose a little bit of something, but hopefully you'll gain something here. And we don't kind of have that whitewash positive message that glosses over the stuff that we talk about, all the stuff that people are going to gain, and sometimes that's not stuff that they're really bothered about gaining, and ignore all the stuff that people are going to lose. We've got to acknowledge what people are going to lose as well. And actually, and again, the subconscious message that we send when we acknowledge what people are going to lose, when we validate that loss, is, you get it. This person understands it. This leader understands it. And do you know what? I appreciate that they've acknowledged my situation, and I'm more likely to get on board with their vision, because I don't feel like I'm being ignored or glossed over. So I don't know if that was a really long-winded way of answering your question.
I love that. Just to think about the energy, because it's not about control and command. It's about, it's almost like the same idea of, you have multiple children. Is it fair to treat them all the same way when they're really different personalities and have different needs? And so that says a lot about sort of the nature of management and leadership, to adapt for the different needs of different people, but to still find balance, so that nobody feels like things are unfair based on different outcomes of.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. One of the things that's really resonated with me, so much so over the last maybe 10, 15 years, is that we need to be moving all cultures to focusing more on the result than the process. So, I mean, one of my clients at the moment, I observed recently, a leader in that business was challenged on working times. And it might sound like a really simple thing, but it's been really hot here in the UK the last few weeks. and we're not really equipped for it. We don't have aircon in our houses because for the 2 weeks of the year that you would need it, it's not worth it. So, but when it's hot here in the UK, it's really difficult. And because a lot of us are hybrid workers now, a lot of this particular team is hybrid workers, being at home is quite difficult in the heat. And this person said, how flexible are we around maybe managing our diary to do a little bit of split time? So work in the morning, bit of downtime in the, I mean, it works in Spain, a bit of downtime in the afternoon, and then kind of logging back on in the evening when it's cool and it's quiet. And it was so great to hear that leader say, I how you choose to work is entirely down to you. As long as you're getting the results, as long as you're getting everything you need to get done, you work best, you work in a way that is most productive for you. And I just love that because it's so empowering to somebody. I mean, and I know you talk about presenteeism in your book, and I'm absolutely not a fan of presenteeism at all. I'm a fan of trusting and empowering people, and not in, I see it in a lot of organizations, and this is often something that I address with organizations. One or two people will make a mistake, so we will basically change the rules for everybody. And it's like, no, because 99.9% of your organization can be trusted. Deal with the 0.1% of the organization that can't individually. Don't sort of treat everybody then in the same way. I'm punished, absolutely. So we've got to get better at empowering people and equipping people to do the best that they can in every aspect. And this theory is transferable into marriages, into parenting. This is, I mean, it's really quite broad, the people that I work with, because it is just so transferable. And that's what I love about it.
Before I ask you about, the closing question that I love to ask my guests, purposeful empathy story when you're on the receiving end. Before we get to that, I just want to ask a couple of quick questions about how you see the difference between empathy, like if you think self-empathy and empathy for others is different, and how and what we'd have to say about that. And then also a question about why do you think people struggle with empathy at all?
Okay, so self-empathy and empathy with others. I think personally, I think the same principles apply. The challenge that we have is that, and it's a great question that very often with the people that I'm coaching, they're being so unempathic towards themselves and so judgmental towards themselves and so almost self-shaming. And I always ask that question: if your best friend was going through this, what would you say to them? And they'll come up with some wonderfully supportive offering for that person. And my response is always the same. So why would you be kinder to somebody else than you would be to yourself? And actually, if I think about, I think it will, what I'm about to say will lead quite nicely into that final question, because empathy starts with self. We've got to be able to deeply understand ourselves and our own challenges and our own barriers and our own journey and our own responses in order to unpick or dissect why we respond to things the way that we do, and what's happening to us. And a psychotherapeutic journey taught me that. And I'm always very envious of this, because psychotherapy seems like it's so much more prominent in the States. It really isn't in the UK. It's still seen very much as a luxury item, and we're still in that sort of leftover from baby boomers of, oh, you stiff up a lip and sort your own problems out. And I used to be like that until I found myself completely ill-equipped to do it. And then psychotherapy just changed my life, because psychotherapy is about teaching you how to empathize with yourself. And that's a transferable skill that you can then take into empathizing with others. And that real non-judgmental curiosity that you've got to have towards yourself and you've got to have towards others in order to truly understand and empathize with them. So that was that question. What was the other one?
Why do people struggle with empathy?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a number of things. One is our own internal value system and our own beliefs and our own personal experiences. We bring them into the situation. they get in the way. They almost create these filters. There's a little video on my YouTube channel I call empathy, the empathy armor, and all of those sort of are sort of our personality, our beliefs, our personal experiences, our values. They create this very unique coat of arms. I wear one, you wear one. They're different. They might have things that are similar, but ultimately it's very unique. And what happens there is my armor protects me. When we think about personal experiences, past experiences, I'll have put something on based on an experience that I've had. It's to keep me safe, but it can also act as a barrier between me and somebody else because it gets in the way of me understanding how somebody else experiences something. And this is where, going back to purposeful empathy, real deliberate and purposeful empathy is about, first of all, knowing what my armor is, deliberately choosing to take it off and put it to one side for a moment, and deliberately choosing to try somebody else's on. And that's horrible. That's hard. It's uncomfortable. It's somebody else's armor won't fit me, or it'll be missing things that I need, or it'll have things that I don't need. And I'll be looking at situations in a completely different way. And that's a real step out of the comfort zone. But that's what empathy is. And that's what purposeful empathy is, deliberate empathy is. It's knowing my own stuff, deliberately choosing to put it to one side and deliberately choosing to understand what somebody else's is. And that's hard. It's really
Yeah, it's
hard. It's
hard.
not
It's
easy.
hard because we're not used to it, and also because I sense from you that there's a degree of generosity. So we just have to kind of practice that too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes the proof of the pudding is in the eating, because it's a very vulnerable space to put yourself in, to take up. Again, the armor protects us. To take it off, we'll
Mm,
feel very, very vulnerable.
mm,
So that it's a scary thing to do. There's a lot of fear attached to that. All I would say is that it's worth it. It's worth the payoff, because from my own personal experiences and the experiences that I've had with thousands of people over the last decade, is, as much as it's scary and it's vulnerable, it's worth it,
right.
because what you actually get when you do that is you understand somebody at a deeper level. You get to know what's really going on for them. You build that really trusted connection, and that's when you can influence them, and that's when you can help them. And even if that help is just sitting alongside them in that muddy puddle,
Yeah.
and them knowing that they're not alone. Because most people, when they're sat in that muddy puddle, they will get themselves out eventually, and they're
Mm,
more likely to do it if there's somebody there with them, alongside them, to help them when the time is right for them.
yeah.
So yeah, it's a really vulnerable thing to do, to choose to be empathic. It will come easier in certain. It'll come easier with people whose armor is like ours. So, one could say that actually you and I might find it really easy to empathize with each other, because we've clearly got some shared bits of my armor are like your armor. We have drawn each other towards each other. That's what also similar armor does. It draws that towards us, which is similar. It repels that, which is different. So
Neil, you offer a seminar on the 5 habits of empathic people. Is that what it's called?
5 Habits of Highly Empathic People. I'm a big Covey fan, so there's a little bit of a nod to Stephen Covey in that, but yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. What's that all about? Give us the high level. What are those 5 things?
So they're really sort of basic principles or habits that, if you can master those habits, they will basically mean that you lean into your life from a much more compassionate and empathic and curious space.
Hmm.
If you can master those habits. And I often think sometimes it's good to have just some direction, or something that people can pick up, or that they can grab quickly and say, right, what do I need to do here? What's the habit I need to employ here to get me through this? So it was after years and years and years of kind of working in the empathy space, I was sitting down thinking, actually, can I come up with, it started out as 5 rules, the 5 rules of a, these are not rules, these are habits. These
Mm.
are ways of being that we need to master. And that if we can master them, we can be truly empathic people.
Beautiful. Would you share what those 5 are, or do they have to come to
Yes.
your seminar?
No, I'm happy to share. Hopefully it'll be enough. People maybe feel like they want to know more, but I'm happy to share. So the first one is, believe that everything starts with a positive intention.
Mm.
And that's really just about tapping into nobody, or 99.9%, the general rule is nobody sets out to hurt anybody, nobody sets out to derail anybody. Everyone's on their own journey, everyone's living their own life. And actually, if we can get ourselves to a space of believing that everything starts with a positive intention, we might then just get a little bit curious as to what's going on for that person if it's not really landing quite right. Or at the very least, we won't throw a judgment out there. We'll ask a question. What's going on? Because this doesn't seem quite right. So believe that everything starts with a positive intention. The one that's really resonates with me is believe that everyone, including you, is doing the best they can right now. And actually, if the way you're doing things right now is perhaps not as great as it was yesterday, or isn't as good as it could be tomorrow, it's acknowledging that and asking yourself why. Okay, so what's going on for me right now? If I'm not sort of doing the best I can, if I'm not doing, or I don't feel like I'm achieving what I could achieve, my full potential, what's getting in the way? So, but I'm not going to judge myself or tell myself that I'm a bad person or shame myself or guilt myself. I'm going to get curious. Get curious isn't one of the habits, but it runs, it's a thread that runs through everything. The third one, expectations are the mother of all disappointments. So this is just around checking in on actually how much are you in control of, and how much of what you expect do you put on other people. And it's really getting to that space of, what, other people don't let us down, our expectations of other people let us down. And if somebody doesn't meet our expectations, again, rather than judging it, it's an indicator. It could prompt us to a space of getting curious as to what's going on in this space. But when we go straight to a space of judgment, and actually that person has deliberately set out to not meet my expectations and hurt me, the whole thing is clouded. So actually, if we could let go of expectations and trust that whatever is supposed to happen will happen, whether that's everything goes as planned, or something happens that prompts us to ask some questions and get a bit curious and find out what went on. It's almost about letting go of those expectations and trusting that whatever's supposed to happen will happen. Fourth one, and this is a big one: observe, don't absorb. And so many, perhaps it's another myth around empathy that we need to bust out, that actually people have that interpretation that actually, in order to be truly empathic, I need to feel what somebody else is feeling. And I encourage people to let themselves off the hook here, because I think you just need to understand it. You just need to know. You need to understand it accurately. Because when we make an assumption and we get it wrong, disconnection, invalidation, when we really understand how somebody else is experiencing a situation or feeling, that's when the connection is there. But we don't have to feel it too. And actually, some would argue that feeling the way somebody else is feeling actually makes their pain about me. And it's not about me. And then the final one: set your boundaries and communicate them. And this is just, I think, one of the biggest life lessons learned for me. It's the habit that out of all the 5 habits, I think it's the one that still creeps up on me every now and again, because I'm human, and mastery takes practice and takes time. But it's so important to understand what your boundaries are, understand what's okay and what's not okay, but even more important, to communicate that, because people don't know if they're crossing your boundaries or not, if they don't know what your boundaries are. And if you allow people to cross your boundaries without acknowledging that that's what's happened and calling that out and saying, do you know what, I wouldn't normally do this, but on this occasion I'll make an exception, that means that the next time they try and cross that boundary and I say no, that's okay. They'll understand that, because actually on this occasion it's going to be a no. But very often people will say yes, 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 and then get to the end of their tether, turn around and go no. And all of a sudden, well, why? What's wrong? You're normally fine with all of this. Why all of a sudden is it a problem? It's always been a problem. I just didn't tell you it was a problem. So absolutely being somebody who knows what their boundaries are, knows what's okay and what's not okay, and communicates that to everybody around them, so that everything is clear. We know what's okay and what's not okay. And, I think it was Brene Brown that said, some of the most loving and compassionate people that she knows are the most boundaried. And people think that being a people pleaser or a yes person is what demonstrates compassion and empathy. I would argue that is actually a lack of boundaries is incredibly unsafe. So yeah, so they're the 5 habits.
Wonderful. So we're going to have information in the description notes below about how to get in touch with you for that seminar or all the work that you do.
Mhm.
Neil, it's been
Yes.
so lovely to have a conversation with someone who clearly geeks out on empathy as much as I do. And I can sense how heartfelt it is for you. And so it's been really a lovely way to spend part of my morning. I know for you it's late afternoon. I wonder if you could share a time in your life when you were on the receiving end of empathy, and
Mhm.
what that meant for you.
But I was trying to think of a specific sort of key moment in my life where purposeful empathy had a transformational impact on me. And just going back to what we were talking about previously, the example that I can think of is when I was deliberately empathic towards myself.
Mm.
That and it was a real sort of full circle moment for me when I was thinking about it in preparation for our conversation, because I was thinking, prior to that, the level of expectation that I had heaped upon myself and the level of judgment that I'd heaped upon myself, and um, the level of criticism that I'd heaped upon myself. I didn't even realize that I was doing. I didn't realize that I'd put all this pressure on myself, or that I created all these expectations on myself over sort of 35 years. And going our conversation full circle, going back to that pivotal moment in 2014 where my life crumbled in a matter of days. I had a choice in that moment to judge myself, to chastise myself, to tell myself to just get on with it and just get over it and just deal with it. And that would have come from a well-intended place. I need a job. I need to support my family. I need to do all those things, but actually was incredibly invalidating on myself. I had a choice, and the choice that I made was to deliberately be empathic towards myself. And I remember saying, I'm open to understanding more about what's happening for me here, understanding why this is affecting me, how this is affecting me, understanding grief, understanding trauma, and understanding how those things are very specifically affecting me, and just being a bit kind to myself for the and possibly for the first time in my life, it's that I, I'm incredibly grateful for the wonderful life that I've had. But I can look back and I can see the challenges. I can see that, growing up a gay kid in the 90s in the UK, not easy, judged constantly. But empathy taught me to understand why that might have been so difficult. I'm just a slight example of that, looking back at in the 90s, what we were on the back of in terms of the terrible tragedy that happened with the AIDS crisis in the 80s. I understand now that homophobia was rife in the 90s because people were scared. People were scared of their kids dying. People were scared of disease spreading. I get it now. I understand it, and I can look at it differently now than I could back then. And that's an example of how empathy is a choice. I could be really, really angry at what happened to me in growing up, and the homophobia that I experienced and the bullying that I experienced. But actually, I'm not, because I can understand where it came from. And I have a great sort of saying that I use in a lot of the work that I do. It might be unacceptable, but is it understandable? And until we get to a space where we're willing to understand, then we're going to be in that judgmental space and that unempathic space. We've got to be willing to understand. And I guess, yeah, that moment, that time in my life in 2014, I was the most open and willing I'd ever been to understand myself and who I was and the journey that I'd been on, and not just in those few horrible days where everything fell apart, but everything that happened before that. And it wasn't until I was truly, again, I would say that was absolutely the catalyst of me becoming self-reflective. I probably thought I was reflective person before then. I wasn't. Thought I was. I became a more reflective person. I became a more compassionate person towards myself And that was where I would absolutely say I truly learned empathy and empathic practice, because it started with me and then it went outwards.
Mm.
So yeah, that for me, the first sort of experience I ever had of purposeful empathy was towards myself.
I love that. And I just want to share for the record, I think we're probably 140 plus guests in. I think this is the first story of self-empathy being the lead
Mm,
story. And I love
mm,
that, especially having lived through my own recent days and
mm,
weeks of coming back from a book tour and feeling absolutely exhausted. It's not selfish to practice self-empathy. Um, it's necessary if we want to be empathic in the world.
mm,
So thank you for ending on that note, Neil. It was so lovely to have this conversation. Neil,
mm.
it's been delightful to have you as a guest. I
Thank
want
you
to
so
thank
much for
you
having
so much
me.
for your time. Thank you for listening and watching. We'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy. Thank you so much for watching an episode of Purposeful Empathy. If you enjoyed this conversation, subscribe to the channel and also consider picking up your copy of Purposeful Empathy. It's an invitation to dial up empathy in your life. The world needs more empathy. We need more empathy. What are you waiting for?